Admiral Chang-Su stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the impossible ship that had appeared in their peaceful sector. The vessel matched historical records from the archives of lost civilizations, but those records were 300 years old. They described the ships of a species that had burned itself out of existence during the Great Burning, when humans chose violence over harmony. The ship was massive, even by Confederation standards. Its hull was scarred with what looked like battle damage from some ancient war, but the metal itself seemed to be made from materials that should not exist according to current physics. The energy readings coming from it were unlike anything in their databases. Its weapons systems were clearly active but built on principles that modern science had forgotten or abandoned. Chang-Su had been chosen to lead the first response fleet because of his experience with difficult situations. He had helped integrate 17 different species into the Confederation over his long career. He knew how to approach primitive civilizations and guide them toward peaceful cooperation. But this was different. These were not primitives, discovering space travel for the first time. These were the ghosts of a dead species returning from the grave. Elder Vex of the Altaruan Council appeared on the communication screen, his ancient face creased with worry. The Altaruans were one of the founding species of the Confederation, and their wisdom had helped create the peace that now covered the galaxy. But even Vex seemed shaken by this development. He had lived through the time when humans still existed, and he remembered why the galaxy had been relieved when they finally disappeared. The humans had been impossible to work with according to the historical records. They refused genetic modifications that would make them less aggressive. They rejected harmony protocols that would help them fit into galactic society. They insisted on maintaining their violent culture even when offered alternatives. Every attempt at peaceful contact had ended in conflict. Every offer of help had been seen as a threat. Speaker Keth of the Crystalline Hierarchy joined the emergency council meeting. Her crystalline form shimmered with colors that indicated extreme caution. The hierarchy had been the species most damaged by human aggression in the old days. Their peaceful nature had made them easy targets for human raiders who saw their resource-rich worlds as prizes to be taken. The crystalline hierarchy had been among the strongest supporters of the final solution to the human problem. But now humans were back, and the implications terrified every member of the Confederation Council. The humans had clearly spent the past 3 centuries developing their technology in isolation. Their ship was proof that they had not stagnated during their exile. Instead, they had become something even more dangerous than before. The energy signatures suggested weapons that could crack planets and shields that could deflect starfire. Admiral Chang-Su received his orders from the Council. They were simple but carried the weight of galactic security. He was to make contact with the human vessel using standard, peaceful greeting protocols. If the humans showed any sign of their old aggressive patterns, he was authorized to use harmony weapons to pacify them before they could threaten the civilized galaxy. The Confederation had tools now that they had not possessed during the first human contact, weapons that could induce calm and compliance in even the most violent species. The Admiral opened a communication channel to the human ship and broadcast the standard greeting protocol. It was a mathematical sequence that showed peaceful intent, followed by offers of aid and cooperation. He explained that the galaxy had changed since the humans had last been active. The old conflicts were over, and peace reigned among all civilized species. The Confederation would be happy to help the humans find their place in this new order. The response came after a long delay. It was a single human voice speaking in the ancient Earth language called English. The translator systems had to work hard to convert it, but the meaning was clear enough. Commander Park Hyun of the Human Colonial Defense Force was requesting immediate communication with the government of Earth. He wanted to know the current status of human colonies and expected full cooperation from local authorities. Chang-Su felt a chill run through his scaled hide. The human did not know. The commander of that ancient warship had no idea that his species was extinct. He was speaking as if the Great Burning had never happened, as if 3 centuries of peace had been just a brief interruption in human expansion. When Chang-Su explained that Earth had been destroyed centuries ago, the silence from the human ship lasted exactly 60 seconds. Then came a response that made every being on the Confederation Fleet remember why their ancestors had feared humans? The voice was calm, professional, and completely controlled, but underneath the diplomatic language was something that had been missing from the galaxy for 300 years. It was the sound of a species that was not afraid to fight for what it believed in. Commander Park asked for clarification about who had been responsible for Earth's destruction. The way he phrased the question made it clear that he did not accept the official story about human self-destruction. He wanted names, locations, and detailed explanations. Changsu realized that he was dealing with humans who had left their home world before the Great Burning People, who had no idea that their species had been eliminated. For the good of galactic peace, the Admiral tried to explain the historical situation. He described how the Confederation had tried to help humanity integrate into galactic society, how they had offered genetic modifications and harmony protocols that would have made humans less aggressive and more cooperative. He explained that humans had chosen violence over peace and had eventually destroyed themselves in nuclear fire rather than accept civilized behavior. But even as he spoke, Changsu realized how his words must sound to the human commander. The official history that had satisfied the galaxy for 3 centuries suddenly seemed full of gaps and contradictions. When viewed from the perspective of someone who had known pre-burning humanity, the Confederation story of peaceful integration attempts sounded less like help and more like conquest. The human ship began moving closer to the Confederation fleet. Its weapon systems powered up slowly but unmistakably. The energy readings were off the charts compared to anything the modern galaxy used for warfare. Changsu realized that his harmony weapons designed to pacify aggressive species might not be enough to handle technology that had been specifically designed for destruction. Commander Park's final transmission before cutting communication was brief, but it carried implications that would reshape the galaxy. He identified himself as representing the human colonial defense force and stated that they were not interested in peace talks. They were here to investigate what had happened to their species and to ensure that it never happened again. Changsu understood that first contact had failed before it had even begun. The humans were not refugees seeking shelter. They were investigators looking for answers. And if they did not like what they found, the galaxy was about to remember why peace had been so hard to achieve when humans were still around. The Admiral began preparing his fleet for what might be the first real war the Confederation had faced in 3 centuries. Commander Park Hyun felt the cold leaving his body as the cryogenic pod opened with a soft hiss. The metal was still freezing against his skin, but warmth was slowly returning to his fingers and toes. He had been asleep for 300 years according to the display screen above his head. 3 centuries of drifting through the dark void between stars while Earth fought its final war. The ship around him was waking up too. Lights flickered on in sequence down the long corridors. The massive Dreadnought. Eternal Dawn had been humanity's last hope when they launched it so long ago. 5,000 of their best and brightest sealed in sleeping pods with orders to find a new home among the distant stars. They were supposed to wake up at their destination, but something had gone wrong. The navigation systems had malfunctioned and they had drifted far off course. Park Hyun stumbled out of his pod and looked around the awakening bay. Hundreds of other pods were opening all around him. People were sitting up, slowly rubbing their eyes and trying to remember who they were. Engineer Kim Dae was already checking the computer terminals near the wall. Her fingers moved quickly across the holographic displays as she tried to understand what had happened to their ship. The artificial intelligence had kept them alive during the long sleep, but it could only do so much without human guidance. Now that they were awake again, it was feeding them information about what it had discovered during their journey. The news was not what anyone expected. The galaxy was full of voices now. Radio signals and quantum communications filled space in every direction, alien languages mixed with mathematical formulas, and what sounded like music or poetry. Dr. Lee Yuna was the first to understand what this meant. She was their expert on alien life, and she had studied every theory about what they might find among the stars. But this was beyond anything they had imagined. The communications were not random or primitive. These were the voices of advanced civilizations that had been talking to each other for centuries. They had found a galaxy full of intelligent life, and somehow humanity had missed all of it. Kim Dae pulled up star charts on the main display screen. The familiar constellations were there, but everything else had changed. Trade routes connected star systems like highways. Massive space stations orbited planets where their old maps showed nothing but empty space. The quantum beacon network that allowed instant communication across vast distances was so advanced that their own technology looked like stone tools in comparison. Park Hyun walked to the communication station and tried to make sense of what they were hearing. The translator systems were working overtime to decode dozens of different languages. Most of the conversations seemed to be about trade agreements or cultural exchanges. There were reports about scientific discoveries and artistic performances. Some kind of galactic civilization had grown up while humanity slept. But there was something strange about all these communications. They all mentioned something called the Confederation, and there were references to harmony, protocols, and compliance measures. The words sounded peaceful, but there was something underneath that made Park Hyun uncomfortable. It reminded him of the propaganda broadcasts from Earth's final days, when the government tried to convince everyone that surrender was really victory engineer. Kim Dae found something that made her face go pale. She called Park Hyun over to her station and pointed at a historical database she had intercepted. The file was labeled Earth Final Status Report, and it was dated just 50 years after they had left home. Park Hyun read the text and felt his blood turn to ice. According to the alien records, Earth had been destroyed in something they called the Great Burning. The human species had apparently gone extinct after refusing to join the galactic community. The report described humans as violent and unpredictable beings who chose self-destruction rather than accept peace. It painted them as a cautionary tale about what happened to species that could not adapt to civilized society. Dr. Lee Yuna joined them at the console and read over Park Hyun's shoulder. Her scientific training helped her spot the problems with the official story. The timeline was wrong for one thing. The destruction had supposedly happened during a human civil war, but the dates matched exactly with when the Confederation had been expanding into that region of space. The report also mentioned that human colonies throughout the galaxy had been peacefully relocated for their own safety, but gave no details about where they had been taken. The more they studied the alien communications, the more disturbing the picture became. Every species in the galaxy seemed to follow the same basic patterns. They all had similar governmental structures, similar social customs, and similar ways of thinking. It was as if someone had taken 1,000 different civilizations and molded them into copies of each other. The diversity was only surface deep underneath. They were all remarkably uniform. Park Hyun made a decision that would change everything. He ordered the navigation officer to set course for the nearest inhabited system. They needed to make contact with this confederation and find out what had really happened to Earth and to the rest of humanity. But he also ordered all weapon systems to be brought online and all defensive screens to be activated. Something about this galactic peace felt wrong. The moment they changed course and began moving toward the alien system, something incredible happened. Every single communication across 3 star systems stopped at exactly the same time. It was as if someone had thrown a switch and turned off all conversation in that entire region of space. The silence stretched on for minutes, then hours. The galaxy had noticed them, and whatever was coming next was big enough to make everyone stop talking. Kim Dae monitored their sensor readings as they approached the system. They were being scanned by technologies that made their own equipment look ancient. But the scans were strange. They seemed more interested in their biological signatures than their weapons or defenses. It was as if the aliens were trying to figure out what species they were dealing with, rather than what kind of threat they might pose. Dr. Lee Yuna made another disturbing discovery in the historical files. She found references to other species that had gone extinct over the past few centuries. Each one was described as being unable to adapt to galactic civilization. Each one had supposedly destroyed itself rather than accept the Confederation's help. But the pattern was too regular to be natural. It looked more like a systematic program of elimination as the Eternal Dawn moved deeper into the inhabited system. Park Hyun realized they were not just making first contact. They were announcing the return of a species that the galaxy thought was safely dead. And judging by the continued silence on all communication channels, the galaxy was not sure how to react to that news. The ship that had drifted alone through space for 3 centuries was no longer alone. But Park Hyun was beginning to suspect that might not be a good thing. Dr. Imbo worked frantically through the deepest archives of Confederation history, while the human Dreadnought maintained its threatening position just outside the fleet formation. As the chief historian for the Galactic Council, she had access to files that had been sealed for centuries, records that most beings in the galaxy had never seen, documents that painted a very different picture of the Great Burning and humanity's final days. The official history taught in schools across the galaxy was simple and clean. Humans had been a violent species that refused to evolve beyond their aggressive nature. When the Confederation offered them genetic modifications to reduce their warlike tendencies, they had rejected the help. When harmony protocols were suggested to help them integrate into peaceful society, they had chosen conflict instead. Eventually, they had destroyed themselves in nuclear fire, rather than accept civilized behavior. But the deeper files told a much darker story. Imbo found military reports from the actual Pacification of Earth campaign. The documents described orbital bombardments of human cities, systematic elimination of human military forces, the relocation of survivors to remote worlds where they were kept under constant surveillance. The official term was protective custody, but the reality looked much more like extermination. The humans had not destroyed themselves. They had been destroyed by Confederation forces when they refused to submit to genetic modification. The few survivors had been scattered across distant worlds where they slowly died out. Their warrior culture could not adapt to the enforced peace, and their population dwindled until the last human colonies went silent. The galaxy had celebrated this as the final achievement of universal harmony. Meanwhile, aboard the Eternal Dawn, Chief Tactical Officer Nam June was conducting his own analysis of the alien fleet that surrounded them. His job was to evaluate potential threats, and what he found was both encouraging and disturbing. The Confederation ships were larger and more advanced than anything from humanity's golden age. Their technology was centuries ahead of what the Eternal Dawn carried, but the ships were designed for peacekeeping rather than warfare. Their weapons were non-lethal by human standards, intended to disable rather than destroy. Their shields prioritized protecting civilians over military effectiveness. Their tactics were based on the assumption that any opponent could be reasoned with or pacified using harmony technology. It was clear that this Confederation had never faced an enemy that actually wanted to hurt them. Nam June shared his findings with Commander Park and watched the captain's expression grow cold as he absorbed the implications. The aliens had built a civilization based on the assumption that violence was obsolete. Their entire military doctrine was designed to deal with minor disputes, not actual war. They had forgotten that some conflicts could only be resolved through superior firepower. The tactical analysis revealed something else that disturbed Nam June. The alien fleet formations were perfect for impressive displays of power, but terrible for actual combat. Their ships were positioned to look threatening, not to provide mutual fire support. Their communication systems were designed for coordination during peacekeeping operations, not for the split-second decisions required in real battle. If it came to actual fighting, the Confederation fleet would be destroyed within minutes. Dr. Lee Yuna made another discovery that changed everything. She had been studying the biological data that the aliens had transmitted as part of their peaceful greeting protocols. The information included genetic profiles of various species in the Confederation, and she noticed something impossible. Every single species showed signs of artificial genetic modification. The changes were subtle, but unmistakable. Someone had been altering the DNA of entire civilizations. The modifications all served the same purpose. They reduced aggression levels, increased cooperation, and made the affected species more susceptible to harmony protocols. It was as if someone had taken dozens of different alien races and gradually molded them into more manageable versions of themselves. The diversity of the galactic community was an illusion. Underneath, they had all been changed to fit the same peaceful template engineer. Kim Day intercepted more communications from the alien fleet, and what she heard made her blood run cold. The Confederation commanders were discussing something called the Final Protocol. It was an emergency procedure that had not been used since the Great Burning. The communications were heavily encrypted, but Kim Dice's systems were designed for military intelligence work. She broke the encryption and discovered the galaxy's darkest secret. The final protocol was not about military defeat, it was about species elimination. When a race proved impossible to integrate into Confederation society, they were not simply conquered or enslaved. They were systematically exterminated, while the official records claimed they had destroyed themselves. The Confederation maintained peace by eliminating anyone who would not submit to their control. Kim Dai found references to 17 different species that had mysteriously gone extinct over the past few centuries. Each one was described in the history books as being unable to adapt to galactic civilization. Each one had supposedly destroyed itself rather than accept the Confederation's help. But the pattern was too regular to be natural. The extinctions happened whenever a species refused genetic modification or rejected harmony protocols. The communications she intercepted revealed that the Confederation leadership was debating whether to use the final protocol on the returned humans. The debate was not about whether humans deserved to survive. It was about whether they could be eliminated without disrupting the carefully maintained peace that covered the galaxy. Some council members worried that other species might ask uncomfortable questions if another extinction happened. So soon after the last one, Commander Park called a meeting of his senior officers and shared what they had discovered. The official story of human extinction was a lie. Their species had been murdered by the same aliens who now claimed to be peaceful, shepherds of galactic harmony. The Confederation maintained unity through systematic elimination of anyone who would not conform to their vision of civilized behavior. The meeting was held in the ship's war room, surrounded by displays showing the tactical situation and the alien fleet positions. Park looked at his officers and saw the same cold anger in their eyes that he felt in his own heart. They were the survivors of a genocide, the last remnants of a species that had been hunted to extinction for the crime of refusing to surrender their freedom. Nam June suggested that they could break through the alien fleet and escape to fight another day. The Confederation's ships were not designed for real warfare, and the Eternal Dawn had weapons that could tear through their defenses, but Park shook his head. He was not interested in running away. He was interested in justice. The commander activated the ship's combat systems and began charging the main weapons batteries. The energy buildup would be impossible for the aliens to miss. They would know that the humans were preparing for battle. But Park wanted them to know. He wanted the Confederation to understand that their victims had returned, and this time, they would not go quietly into extinction as the weapons reached full charge. Park opened a final communication channel to the alien fleet. His message was broadcast on all frequencies so that every ship in the sector could hear what he had to say. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of 3 centuries of suppressed truth and the promise of justice finally served. The galaxy was about to remember why peace built on the graves of the free never lasts forever. Admiral Changsu gave the order that he hoped would save both fleets from destruction. His ships moved into pacification formation and began broadcasting harmony waves toward the human Dreadnought. The technology had been perfected over centuries of peacekeeping operations. It could induce calm and compliance in even the most aggressive species by affecting their brain chemistry directly. No being had ever been able to resist its soothing influence. The harmony waves washed over the Eternal Dawn like invisible ocean currents designed to drain away anger and replace it with peaceful cooperation. The Confederation fleet waited for the human ship to power down its weapons and request negotiation. Every species in the galaxy had eventually submitted to harmony protocols. It was simply a matter of biology and chemistry working together to promote universal peace. But nothing happened. The human ship's weapons remained at full charge. Its shield stayed active, and its crew continued preparing for battle. Changsu ordered his operators to increase the harmony wave intensity to levels that should have rendered any crew unconscious with bliss. The waves were now strong enough to pacify an entire planet full of the most violent species ever encountered. Commander Park felt the alien technology trying to work on his mind. It was subtle at first, like a gentle suggestion that conflict was unnecessary, but the human crew had been trained to resist mental manipulation during the war that destroyed Earth. Their minds had been conditioned to recognize and reject external influence. The harmony waves that could control entire civilizations bounced off human consciousness like water off stone. The aliens had made a fundamental mistake. In their understanding of human psychology, they assumed that aggression was a flaw that could be corrected through chemical or technological means. They did not understand that human violence was not a bug in their programming. It was a feature. Humans had evolved as predators and survivors. Their capacity for violence was matched by their capacity to choose when not to use it. Nam. June smiled grimly as he watched the alien fleet struggle with their failing pacification technology. The Confederation's ships were designed around the assumption that harmony protocols would always work. Their weapons were non-lethal. Their tactics were based on compliance, and their formations prioritized psychological impact over tactical advantage. They were about to learn why assumptions could be fatal in warfare. The first shot from the Eternal Dawn was not aimed at any specific ship. It was fired into empty space as a demonstration of power. The energy beam cut through the vacuum like a sword of light, and its intensity was beyond anything the Confederation had ever witnessed. Their sensors screamed warnings about energy levels that should have been impossible to generate or control. Chang Su realized that they were facing weapons designed by a species that understood destruction as an art form. The humans had not spent 3 centuries developing better ways to promote peace. They had spent that time perfecting more efficient methods of war. Their technology was not more advanced than Confederation science. It was more focused. The aliens had forgotten how to build weapons that could actually kill. The second shot was aimed directly at Chang Su's flagship. It struck the forward shields and tore through them like tissue paper. The energy beam punched through 3 decks of armor plating before the emergency systems managed to contain the damage. The ship survived, but barely. Chang Su realized that the humans had been holding back with their demonstration shot. They could have destroyed his entire fleet with their first volley. Captain Songara commanded the fastest ship in the Confederation fleet, and she tried to use her advantages in speed and maneuverability to get close enough to the human Dreadnought to use her disabling weapons, but the human ship moved like something alive. Its engines were primitive compared to Confederation technology, but they were used with a skill that made up for any technical disadvantage. The Eternal Dawn rolled and twisted through space like a predator, playing with its prey. Every move was calculated to create maximum psychological impact while maintaining optimal tactical position. Park was not just trying to win a battle. He was trying to teach the galaxy a lesson about the difference between weapons designed to control and weapons designed to destroy. Songara's ship fired its most powerful non-lethal weapons at the human Dreadnought. The beams were designed to overload enemy systems and force a peaceful surrender, but they struck the human ship's hull and simply disappeared. The humans had learned to build armor that could absorb and dissipate energy attacks that relied on disruption rather than destruction. The return fire from the Eternal Dawn was precise and devastating. It struck Songara's ship in exactly the right places to disable her weapons without destroying her crew. The ship tumbled helplessly through space, completely unable to fight, but with all life support systems intact. The humans were demonstrating that they understood the difference between defeating an enemy and slaughtering helpless victims. Within 10 minutes, half the Confederation fleet was drifting powerless through space. Their crews were alive and uninjured, but their ships were useless. The humans had systematically dismantled their ability to fight back while avoiding any unnecessary casualties. It was a display of tactical precision that made Chang Su realize just how outclassed his forces were. The human ship opened communication channels to broadcast Commander Park's voice across all frequencies in the system. His words were calm and professional, but they carried implications that chilled every listener in the fleet. Park identified himself as representing the human colonial defense force and demanded an explanation for why Earth no longer existed. Chang Su tried to negotiate. He explained that the Great Burning had been a tragic misunderstanding and that the Confederation had done everything possible to save humanity from itself. He offered to share the historical records and to provide any assistance the returned humans might need. But Park's response cut through his diplomatic language like a blade. The human commander had already accessed Confederation historical databases during the battle. His ship's computer systems had broken through their security while their weapons were breaking through their defenses. Park now had complete records of the pacification campaign, the forced relocations, and the systematic elimination of human colonies. The official story of human self-destruction was revealed as the lie it had always been. Park's final transmission before ending communication was broadcast on all frequencies throughout the sector, so that every inhabited world could hear his words. He spoke not just to the Confederation fleet, but to every species that had accepted genetic modification and harmony protocols in exchange for peace. He told them that freedom was not something that could be given up safely, and that species who surrendered their right to choose their own destiny would eventually lose everything else as well. The battle was over, but the war was just beginning. News of the engagement spread through quantum communication networks, faster than light itself. For the first time in 3 centuries, a Confederation fleet had been defeated, not through political maneuvering or diplomatic pressure, but through superior firepower and tactical brilliance. Across the galaxy, reactions varied wildly. Some worlds expressed horror that such violence was possible in their civilized age. Others began asking dangerous questions about their own compliance with Confederation requirements. The genetic modifications that had seemed like gifts now looked like chains. The harmony protocols that had brought peace now seemed like methods of control. The galaxy that had gone silent when the humans appeared was now buzzing with conversations the Confederation could not control. For the first time in centuries, beings across hundreds of worlds were talking about freedom and choice, and the right to determine their own futures. The humans had fired more than weapons in that battle. They had fired the first shot in a revolution. The human Dreadnought did something that surprised everyone. Instead of pressing their military advantage, they began broadcasting information across all communication frequencies. Engineer Kim Tae had spent days breaking through Confederation security systems during and after the battle. What she found in their archives was evidence that would shatter 3 centuries of carefully maintained lies. The broadcasts began with historical records showing the real events of the Great Burning Orbital. Bombardment footage from the pacification campaign revealed human cities burning under alien weapons, while Confederation forces systematically eliminated military targets. Communication intercepts showed Confederation commanders discussing the most efficient methods for exterminating human populations while maintaining plausible deniability. But the evidence went far beyond humanity. The archives contained records of 17 other species that had been eliminated over the past few centuries. Each extinction followed the same pattern. First came offers of genetic modification and harmony protocols. Then came economic pressure and political isolation. Finally came the final protocol, and another species disappeared from the galaxy forever. Broadcasts included audio recordings of Confederation Council meetings where leaders casually discussed which species needed to be removed next. The conversations were chilling in their bureaucratic calm. They spoke about genocide the way administrators might discuss budget allocations. Every extinction was presented as a necessary step toward universal peace. On the industrial world of Kepler Station, dock workers stopped their shifts to listen to the human broadcasts. They had never questioned why their ancestors' warrior traditions had been gently discouraged until they disappeared completely. Now they learned that their species had been modified to be more compliant, more peaceful, and more manageable. Their genetic heritage had been stolen from them one generation at a time. The reactions were immediate and explosive. Work stoppages began spreading across the station as beings realized that their peaceful nature was not natural evolution, but artificial manipulation. The harmony protocols that had seemed like gifts now looked like chains designed to keep them from asking dangerous questions. On the academic world of New Athens, professors and students gathered around communication terminals to hear evidence that their historical databases had been carefully edited for centuries. Entire civilizations had been erased from the records. Species that had contributed art, science, and philosophy to galactic culture had been eliminated because they would not submit to Confederation control. Dr. Yamsu, a professor of galactic history, felt her world crumble as she realized that everything she had taught for decades was propaganda. The peaceful integration of species into the Confederation had been achieved through systematic elimination of anyone who refused to cooperate. The diversity of galactic culture was an illusion, built on the graves of the free student riots, erupted across New Athens as young beings demanded access to unedited historical records. They wanted to know what their ancestors had been like before genetic modification, what their original cultures had valued before harmony protocols shaped their thinking. The peaceful campus descended into chaos as 3 centuries of suppressed truth broke. Free even member species of the Confederation Council began questioning their own histories. The Altaruan elders discovered that their ancient wisdom traditions had been gradually altered over generations to promote compliance rather than independent thinking. The crystalline hierarchy learned that their peaceful nature was not an evolutionary advantage, but a result of systematic modification that had made them perfect victims. Admiral Chang Su faced an impossible situation as more Confederation fleets arrived to contain the crisis. The human ship continued its broadcasts while moving toward the Galactic core, gathering followers from worlds that had decided they wanted to hear the rest of the story. Some were rebels and dissidents, but others were ordinary citizens who simply wanted answers their governments would not provide. The fleet that followed the Eternal Dawn grew larger with each passing day. Ships from a dozen different species joined the convoy, not because they supported human violence, but because they supported the right to know the truth about their own histories. The humans had become the catalyst for something that had been building in the galactic unconscious for centuries. Captain Song Ara repaired her damaged ship and found herself facing a choice that would define her future. She could rejoin the Confederation fleet and help maintain the peace that had defined her entire life, or she could acknowledge that peace built on lies and genocide was not worth preserving. She chose to follow the humans toward the Galactic core. The Confederation Council met in emergency session as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Worlds were demanding independence from treaties they had never truly understood. Species were rejecting genetic modifications they had never realized were imposed on them. The unity that had been the Confederation's greatest achievement was crumbling in the face of uncomfortable truths. Elder Vex argued for immediate military action to stop the human broadcasts before more worlds could be contaminated by dangerous ideas. Speaker Keth suggested negotiation and compromise, possibly offering some form of limited autonomy to species that demanded it. But Council Chairman Roll knew that neither approach would work. The damage was already done. The galaxy had tasted uncensored information for the first time in 3 centuries, and the experience was both intoxicating and terrifying. Some worlds embraced the chaos that came with freedom, while others begged for the return of the peaceful certainty they had known. But there was no going back. The genie of truth could not be put back in its bottle. On distant frontier worlds, beings who had never heard of humans began talking about something called choice. They had lived their entire lives following paths that seemed natural and obvious, but now they wondered if those paths had been chosen for them. The genetic modifications that made them peaceful and cooperative suddenly felt like invisible chains. The human broadcasts included technical information about how to reverse genetic modifications and disable harmony protocols. The knowledge was dangerous. It could lead to violence and chaos as species rediscovered aggressive instincts they had lost. But it also offered something that had been missing from the galaxy for centuries: the right to choose their own destiny. As the Eternal Dawn approached the Galactic core, it was followed by a fleet of ships from dozens of different worlds. The Confederation prepared its most powerful forces for a final confrontation, but they faced a problem that superior firepower could not solve. The humans were not just fighting for military victory. They were fighting for the right of every species to determine its own future. Commander Park opened a final communication channel before the last battle. He spoke not as a conqueror, seeking to dominate the galaxy, but as a representative of everyone who had ever chosen to fight rather than submit. His words were simple, but they carried the weight of 3 centuries of suppressed freedom. The galaxy was about to choose between the safety of controlled peace and the dangerous freedom of self-determination. The outcome would determine whether the next 3 centuries would be remembered as an age of harmony or an age of liberation. The final battle took place in the shadow of the Confederation capital world, where their most powerful fleet waited in perfect formation. Admiral Chang Su commanded over 200 ships representing every species in the Galactic Alliance. Their weapons were charged, Their harmony generators were at maximum power and their crews were prepared to fight for the peace they had known their entire lives. Commander Park broadcast one final message before the battle that would determine the galaxy's foreseen future. He spoke not as a military commander seeking victory, but as a voice for every being who had ever wondered what they might have become if they had been allowed to choose their own path. His words were carried across every communication channel. In the sector, Park told the galaxy that the humans were not there to conquer or to rule. They were there to remind every species of something that had been taken from them so gradually that most had never realized it was gone. The right to make their own mistakes, to choose their own leaders, to determine their own values, even if those values led to conflict. The human fleet that approached the Confederation capital was not just human anymore. Ships from 37 different worlds had joined the convoy over the past weeks. Some were rebels who had always questioned Confederation authority, but most were ordinary beings who had simply decided that truth was worth fighting for, even if that truth was uncomfortable. The battle began. When Confederation forces activated their most powerful harmony generators, the waves of pacifying energy that washed over the approaching fleet were strong enough to render entire populations unconscious with artificial bliss. The technology represented 3 centuries of refinement in the art of peaceful control, but something unexpected happened. The alien crews who had joined the human convoy did not succumb to the harmony waves. Some had received genetic modifications from human medics that made them resistant to mental control. Others simply chose to fight through the artificial calm because they had decided that freedom was worth the pain of making their own choices. Dr. Lee Yuna had worked tirelessly with volunteers from dozens species to reverse the genetic modifications that made them susceptible to harmony protocols. The work was dangerous and not always successful, but it offered something that many beings had never experienced: the ability to feel genuine anger at injustice, rather than artificial peace. The space battle that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever witnessed. It was not just a conflict between different technologies or tactics. It was a war between 2 completely different philosophies about how intelligent beings should live. The Confederation fought to preserve peace and order, while the human-led alliance fought for chaos and choice. Captain Song Ara led a squadron of former Confederation ships,